Okay, so what we're going to look at starting today, or I'm only looking at it, you're not looking at anything. There's a few buttons here. How about that one? How about this one? Woohoo! Okay, so what we're going to start looking at today is a thing called JavaScript. So for those of you who hate programming, sorry, there's no escaping the programming. So this module requires that you do a little bit of JavaScript, and so we're going to do a little bit of JavaScript. It also requires that you 15% of your marks come from JavaScript. So this should really go at the end. What I didn't want to do is to, do it in week 11 and give you an exam in week 12. It doesn't really matter when we do it, so I thought we'd do it now, and then you could have time to kind of have it sink in a bit. But it isn't really core to this module. On the list of things I'll do when I'm king is I will just remove this from this module altogether. Okay? Because I don't think there's any place in here really. So at least we got it down to 15% of the marks for the module. It was something crazy like 40 last time out. So it's not key to the module. If you're in DWeb, suck it up. You have to do this stuff anyway, so that's not a problem. If you really hate programming, if you're just allergic to it, you could probably safely just file this under stuff I can't do and forget about it. It's worth 15% of the module, and that shouldn't be the making or breaking of you. So don't stress out about it. But we're going to have a look at it now, and might do a bit in the labs as well, and then that's just your JavaScript done, and you can let it digest and sink in a bit. So then when you're assessed on it by whatever mechanism that turns out to be, it'll have been sitting in your brains for a little while anyway. Okay? So it doesn't flow naturally from what we were doing. It's not the next thing you would do, but we're going to do it just so we can park little seeds of it in your brain and hope they will grow and bear fruit. Okay? Sometimes you just need a bit of time with something. Now, so first thing about JavaScript is it's not Java. In fact, it's got nothing to do with Java at all. It's just that when JavaScript kind of came out, Java was all the rage, and it was all Java. And so people said, well, let's call the scripting language we have for browsers, let's call that JavaScript, because Java's cool right now. Java's still cool, and JavaScript is even getting, more and more cool. People now say, if you want to learn programming, go learn JavaScript. It's probably the worst programming language in the world. Okay? And it's certainly one of the worst programming languages in the world you could start learning programming on. Right? It's horrendous. And, like I said, when I am king, you can fill in the blanks. The things I will do to those people. Top of my list. Now, but I digress. Okay? So, Java, as you know, is a high-level programming language that's platform independent. In my day at college, the promise was you write your programs in a high-level language like C or something, and then it'll compile down and run on any computer. And that was the whole point of high-level programming languages. And it was good in theory, but it never actually worked. I guess there was too many interactions perhaps with the operating system and with the architecture of the machine itself on different platforms to ever really make that work. And so now when we write Java, it runs on a virtual machine. So if I was to run a Java program on this machine here, it would crank up its Java virtual machine. And the code, the programs, would be written in a language that Java virtual machine understands, and it would do all its business. Now, underneath that, there's a piece of hardware in my machine actually running the Java virtual machine. But at least that means then, if you take the same code, this is a bad example because obviously this device and this device were made by the same people, the good people in Cupertino, California. But you could take your Java on another device and it should run the same. The details aren't nearly as important as the agreement to have this makey-uppy standard machine that this all runs on. Presumably you all know this already, or you haven't heard it in quite so abstract terms before. But when you run your Java program, you're not really running it on the computer, you're running it, that computer is running a pretend computer for it to run on. So it's a bit like if you, do you know the way you can get sort of emulators for ye olde 1980s video games, so that you can actually run on your computer a program that could read the cartridge or something and play the game as it was actually run the code that was actually written way back then. Some of you may have done that if you're into gaming. So it's kind of like that. You know all this already. You know more about Java than I do. Okay. Now, JavaScript, on the other hand, has some features in common with Java, right? But it's nothing to do with Java really. It's a scripting language that runs in the browser, and we use it to add interactivity to web pages. So if we want to add some intelligence or some interactivity, we can use JavaScript to do that. So far all we've seen is, you write the HTML and the CSS and the page draws. And there's your page. Where you have a page that you can interact with, you can be pretty sure it's JavaScript is making that interaction happen. Okay? It's quite limited in what it can do. It's not a terribly sophisticated language, but also it's limited in what it can do on purpose, in that you don't want JavaScript to be able to like go roaming around your machine, deleting files, for example. That would be so not good. You don't want to go to a web page and have the authors of that website have access to everything on your computer. They would love it, and God knows we give them enough as it is. But you wouldn't build that into the architecture. So the code then is executed by the browser. So you write your JavaScript code, you write your HTML, you write your CSS, and then the browser runs that code. So if you were coming out with a new browser tomorrow, it would need to know how to understand HTML. It would need to understand how to take CSS and apply that to the HTML, and it would need to run JavaScript as well, or no one would be bothered with it. So we have our HTML for the content, we have our CSS for the styling information, and we have our JavaScript for the codey, interacty bits. Okay? Thanks be to God, quite recently there's been some agreement by the browser manufacturers. So for many years when I was teaching people JavaScript, I'd have to say, no, in Firefox it's like this, but in Internet Explorer you have to write this special code just for Internet Explorer. But at least now it's fairly standard. I mean, pretty standard now at this stage. Okay, now that doesn't solve the problem of the millions of people who don't even know that they have a browser that needs upgrading or updating. They just have the internet. So there's millions of those people who you might still have to worry about. But for the purposes of this module, we don't worry about those people. They're just old and lazy. Okay, now. So the code then is embedded directly into the HTML file, or depending if it's really, really long, you'll have it in a separate file. But it looks the same anyway. Okay? I'm wary of telling you too much about, giving you too much JavaScript. So we're really only going to look at some very, very, very basic things. The main things you would use JavaScript for, have you seen rollovers? You put the cursor over something and the picture changes. So you might have like this, you put your finger over it, the cursor over, take your finger off, it comes back. That's the gateway drug really for JavaScript. Most people think, I want to do a rollover, how do I do that? And so they have to figure out some JavaScript to do that. Ironically, I think rollovers are on the way out, because if you take, thanks to the people again from Cupertino, I mean, if I have my iPhone and, it's not like if I hover my finger over the screen, it knows where my finger is. On a touch device, you're either touching it in a particular place or you're not. Whereas with a cursor, you can hover over something before you click it, and that hovering over it can cause something to happen. That's not going to happen with a touch device. So I would speculate that in a few years, rollovers will just be oh, isn't that cute, you know, stuff for, you know, people with mice and stuff, you know? No. So scripts then can be in the header or can be in the body. Generally, the stuff that's in the body will execute as the page is loaded. And stuff that's in the header just kind of sits there waiting to be called. So if you have functions or methods, what are you used to calling them in your Java class? Methods, functions, all the same thing? Or do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. Whatever you like to call them, you know, those bits of code that you park somewhere and call them later, they'll be in the header. Okay. Most of the stuff we look at will be in the body. Now, so JavaScript then does things like it has variables, same as any other language. Okay. If you don't declare your variables, show or harm. Like the main thing about JavaScript is that the people that devised it spent all the time saying show or harm. Do you know? So it's very flexible, but on the other hand, it means it's not it's not very strict. So when it comes to types, for example, you know, is it if you have the string, you know, 1, 1, 2, is that the string with the character 1 and the character 1 and the character 2, or is it the number 102? Well, you know, what harm? Sometimes, you know, JavaScript, sure, you know, it looks like a number, I'll treat it as a number. You know, sure, it's a string, I'll treat it as a string. And then sometimes, you know, you end up in a situation where if you're not strict with yourself when you're using JavaScript, you can come a cropper. So if you input something off the screen, say 112, and you start treating that as a number without converting it to a number because it was a string, well, your program might work most of the time, and then it'll just stop one day when you add some new code and you won't know why. So I lost an hour of my life once debugging a guy's code because we narrowed the problem down to a situation where there was 5 and 35, and it was saying, well, if 5, you know, is less than 35, then do whatever, and it wasn't doing the whatever. And like, we knew X was 5, we knew Y was 35, and we were like, you know, what's going on here? Obviously 5 is less than 35. You know, what's going on? And what was going on? Well, yeah, 5 is less than 35 in number land, but in string land, the string 35 comes before the string 5. You know, string 35 is less than string 5 because that's just alphabetical. And you know, that's time you never get back. So you need to be strict with yourself in JavaScript. You need to know all the time, you know, is that an integer? Is that a string? Is that a real number? And you be strict with yourself, because JavaScript will just go, sure, what harm? You didn't declare it, what harm? Is it a string? Sure, it looks like a string, I'll treat it as a string. Is it a number? Sure, it looks kind of like a number, I'll treat it like a number. And that what harmness eventually ends in stress and drama. Now, so let's look at this code here, okay? It's very important to realize that with JavaScript, what you have at the end of the day is still a common or garden web page. You still have to have the HTML, the head, the title, the body. Something that people are neglecting as well. I see that in labs. People aren't putting in the HTML and the header and the title and the body, just going straight to like, here's my lovely table or something. That's going to end badly. So every single HTML file must have, you know, begin HTML, /HTML, begin head, begin title, all that in there. Now, and then embedded in that is a segment of JavaScript code. So if you look there, this page doesn't do very much apart from the JavaScript code. Up here we have script type equals text /JavaScript. So that tells the browser, look, dude, here's some code coming. It's JavaScript code. So that opens the possibility, at least, for some other kind of programming language. You know, when I am king, we can have Colin script where everyone has to declare their variables, and if they don't, you know, they get an electric shock or something. Okay, But until then, JavaScript is pretty much the only show in town. But having that tag there allows that possibility anyway, at least. Okay? So this script is in the body. So this is going to be executed as the page loads. No. So here we have two built-in methods. One is called date and one is called getHours. You notice here that the syntax should be looking familiar to you. It's very Java-y. Okay? So this first line here is creating a new date object. So date basically comes back with the current date and time. I always get a bit confused as to whether it's the current date and time locally or globally. Obviously, if you're doing things on the internet, there's a standard time. You know, if Lady Gaga's new album is coming out at midnight on such and such a day, you know, is that midnight in Los Angeles, midnight in New York, or midnight in Ballincollig? You know, there's a global time and a local time. It turns out and it's confusing for us because we live in the standard time zone. So the time zone that people use for web time or global time is the time zone we live in for half of the year. So when your code comes back and says that it's, 24 minutes past 11 right now, you don't know actually if it's talking about 24 minutes past 11 locally or globally. And of course the time of the year when we're in a different time zone, we're all off because it's summer, so it doesn't really come up very often. As it turns out, it's the local time, not the global time. Okay? So it's the time on the machine local to you. Now, so getHours then, that built-in method, what that does is it extracts from that object the hours part of the time. Okay? So it's telling us that if this new date thing there was going to come up with 11:25 on the 5th of November 2013. getHours would extract from that the 11 part. Okay? So now int_hr has 11 in it. You can tell from my variable names that I used to program in VB. So if I write code to murder someone, the CSI people might be able to say, haha, that man's over 40 and knows VB. Okay. Now, so document.write then is JavaScript that will output to the screen, so to speak. And the important thing to remember is that what you're outputting is common or garden HTML. So the next line there, we say document.write br/, we're going on to a new line. So you actually output HTML when you're doing a document.writes. Yeah. Here then we have an if statement. And the if statements in JavaScript can be a bit confusing actually, so you have to be careful. I think the syntax of them allows for some ambiguity that could allow people to trip up. It's not like you have an if and then an end if at the end, so just be careful there. So here we're saying if HR is less than or equal to 11. Now in JavaScript, your Boolean condition on the if must always be wrapped up in brackets. If it doesn't work. So here we're saying if HR is less than or equal to 11, then we're going to say document.write, and notice here I've got some B for bold tags, so it's going to output in bold, good morning. And so it generates actual HTML. So you could generate an image tag, for example. You could generate an anchor tag. You could, depending on some input variables, generate a table of a particular number of rows or a particular number of columns, whatever. But the document.write is outputting HTML. That's an important point. Now here then we have the Boolean and in here. And again, in some programming languages you would actually say and A and D. But this is using the Java style syntax, isn't it? So if I set you ampersand, ampersand, you know that's Boolean and, yeah? That's not very emphatic. I'll take the lack of objections as a yes. Okay. Now, so here we're saying if HR is greater than 11 and HR is less than or equal to 16, then we're going to say good afternoon. While we're on the topic though, I don't use the word wrong. What's off about that piece of code there? No, but that's good. That's important actually, because semicolons are very important in JavaScript. It's very unforgiving. It's one of those programming languages. If there's a hair out of place, it just says to you, and that's the problem. You don't get much feedback from the browser if something goes wrong. So when you're putting in your JavaScript code, you have to put it in piece by piece. Like if you've written out your program on paper, you know, and you're typing it in, you put in a piece, see if that runs, add a few more lines, see if that runs. There's no point in typing in 200 lines of code and then giving it a lash, because it'll just say, and that's all the feedback it gives you. So you must have a semicolon at the end of every statement. But you wouldn't put in a semicolon here, for example, because that's not the end of the statement yet. Interestingly though, this if statement doesn't have a semicolon at the end at all, because the way the brackets are set up. But you would have semicolons inside then in the compound statements, we'd call them. So it's essential that that semicolon be there. It's wrong if you don't have it there. But another problem with semicolons, another problem with JavaScript is that just if you've seen when your HTML was dodgy, you know, if you made a mistake in your HTML, a lot of the browsers would say, sure, I'll give it a lash. And the browsers might differ considerably as to how much trouble they will go to try and make your page look okay. Similarly with the JavaScript, even if it's wrong, the browsers might give it a go, like, you know, if they can figure out what it is they think you mean, they'll try and do that. But of course, that's not a very good strategy for having code that works, because, you know, that's the kind of thinking that causes planes to fall out of skies, really. Now, anybody have a problem with this condition here? So it's not a syntax error, really. It's not an error even, it's just a kind of a something's a bit off with that. Anybody see it? Okay, well, if we look here at this condition, here we're saying if ours is less than or equal to 100, then we're going to do this. Else, we're going to do this part. Now, the else part here, we wouldn't be in there unless ours was greater than 11. If ours was less than or equal to 11, well, we'd be in the other part of the code. So it doesn't make sense in here to check if ours is greater than 11, because if it was, we wouldn't be here. You know, it's a bit like checking to see if there's beer in a pub. But you're like, what's the point of that? If it didn't have beer, we wouldn't be here, because we were going to the pub. So, you know, if ours wasn't greater than 11, wouldn't be in this part of the code anyway. So that's kind of redundant there, really. Okay? And I'll see if I can show you this working. Look, I ran this earlier at 10:06. And if we reload the page, now it says the time is 11:32 and good morning. So I'll make you all stay in class now today until a minute past 12, just so we can see this say, what, good afternoon or something. Okay? But if you can handle the excitement. Now, This next piece of code now is a bit more complex. And this illustrates two different things. The first thing is we're going to look at is how we generate random numbers, how we do random numbers in JavaScript. Because random numbers are cool because they can give us some randomness, which is essential for any kind of game. You'll see, if you have a card game, I mean, the whole point of a card game is that you don't know what card is going to come up next. That's the fun. Similarly, throwing dice, stuff like that. Okay, so we're going to look at the ability to generate random numbers, and that can be used to interesting effect in a website because you kind of expect it to be the same all the time. But if you can give it a sense of being different when a person goes back, it can feel more current. So I mean, if you had a website, about, I don't know, all the restaurants in Cork or something, if when the person came there, the pictures that you used were different every time, it might feel like this is a, fresh, frequently updated website, when in fact, you wrote it 2 years ago and hasn't changed. But so that can be something you can do. But really, mostly just for games, I think you need to deal with randomness. Okay, and then we're also going to do something which is a bit of a head wreck. We're going to do a document.write where we output an image tag. So I knew I went to. So I'm just going to put on the board here what an image tag looks like, just to remind you. In an image tag, you have img src equals quote. It could be like, pic.jpg or something. And you also have the alt and the width and the height in there. But let's just, for our purposes today, just consider that to be more of the same. Okay? So img src equals quote pic.jpg, quote, and then slash. So if we want to output an image tag, we need to make sure it's in that format. Now, so I'm going to explain this now, hopefully, to your satisfaction, and you'll be able to mess around with this. Now, so random numbers first up. There's a built-in method in JavaScript called math.random. Note the capital M and the lowercase r. Again, JavaScript is not at all forgiving. It was on the slide, but I didn't mention it. Variable names in JavaScript are case sensitive. So total with an uppercase T and total with a lowercase t, completely different variable names. So you need to watch for that. Generally, you should probably just go with all lowercase variable names. That's what the cool people do. Now, so math.random will return a real number between 0 and 1. Do you know the difference between a real and an integer? Any of that sound familiar? Is that a yes? Is that a no? Is that a what the fuck? I mean, anyway, so a real number is like a decimal, we might call it. So 0.3412579 is a decimal, is a real number. 12.42102 is a decimal number. Because it would need to be a real number, because obviously there aren't a lot of integers between 0 and 1, let's face it. If it came back with an integer, it wouldn't be a whole lot of use. So it comes back with a real number between 0 and 1. So if you say math.random, that will evaluate to, 0.3025519, whatever. It might evaluate to 0.000102. It might evaluate to 0.99999. I'm not clear if it would ever evaluate to 1.0. I don't believe it would. And I'm not clear if it would ever evaluate to just plain 0. But it may do. So it's going to come back with a number between 0 and 1. And then what we'll look at this one step by step. So we want a number between 0 and 6. We want a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. So math.random is going to come back with the number between 0 and 1. If we multiply, so let's say that was 0.4 0.4758, whatever, blah, blah, blah. If we multiply that by 6, we'll end up with a number between 0 and 6. I had a number between 0 and 1. Don't know what it is, but if we multiply it by 6, we end up with a number between 0 and 6. In this case, that turns out to give 2.855 blah, blah, blah. Now what math.round does is it converts a real number to an integer. So if you give it 3.2, it'll come back with 3. If you give it 1.9, it'll come back with 2. So it rounds up or down, whichever is the closest. And it'll take a real number, a decimal as we might call it, and convert it to an integer. Yeah? Everybody get the idea? So from this .random method that gives you a real number between 0 and 1, you can get any range that you want then. So if you want, 0 to 66, well, you multiply the result of math.random by 66, and then you'll have a real number between 0 and 66. If you wanted a real number between 1 and 67, you might take math.random, multiply it by 66, and then add 1 to it. So you can get any range of numbers that you want. Now, so the images now that we're going to try and write, they're called so they're called page photo 01, page photo, well, I'll give you that. So we've got a bunch of images called page dash photo dash 00.jpg and page photo 01.jpg blah 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 page photo 06.jpg. So we've got a bunch of images. And so we want to, using the JavaScript, build up an image tag that contains one of those images. So we have in the variable myInt, we have that integer that's a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. So we have that in the variable. And what we want to do is we want to build up an image tag that includes that variable. And so that's what all this long thing here is doing. So we're doing a document.write. In this case, it would have been, what did we say our number was? 3. We do a document.write image source equals quote page dash photo dash 03 dot jpg slash close off the bracket. So that's what we want to do. But it looks a bit harder than you would expect. That's because of the issue of quotes inside quotes. So here we're saying document.write quote. So this is what we're going to output now. So the browser is going to get this HTML. It's going to get open bracket img src equals, and here's the thing, okay? What happens if you want to, in JavaScript, when you're doing a document.write, you output, you specify what you want to output in a string, and you specify a string by putting like quotes at one end and the other. What happens if you want to put a string in the string? Have you come across that problem before? No? You lead remarkably untroubled lives. Don't worry. In a few semesters, your lives will get very complicated. Okay. So if you want to put a string inside in the string, well, then you need to do what's known as an escape. So in most programming languages, there'll be some special character, an escape character, and that slash there isn't a slash that's going to be output. That slash is saying the thing that comes after me is special in some way. And what it's saying there is that the quote that comes after that slash is not the end of the string. It's a quote inside in the string. So this is saying open bracket img src equals quote page dash photo dash 0. It's saying output that much. And the slash and the quote there, that's how you represent a quote inside in the string. Okay? And then that one there, my arrows have moved. So this one here then is that quote there is the end of the string. So the string starts here and ends here, and it has a quote inside in it. Because we need to output this quote here for the image tag. And later we'll need to output this one. Next up then, we're outputting the value of my int, which we decided in the case of the random real number we got that was going to be 3. But it could be a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. Now I've done something quite bold there. I've treated the integer as if it was a string. And most programming languages wouldn't let you do that, but JavaScript does. So although that was an integer, I'm using it. So although it was the number 3, I'm using it as the string 3 right now because it suits me. Which is bad practice really, but it keeps it shorter. And then here then, we have the start of the string. Somehow my arrows moved over. Here we have the start of the string. Again. Oh, sorry. In JavaScript, you join strings together with a plus. Here we're saying output dot JPG quote. So that's the second quote here at the end of the JPG. And then we do slash and close it off. Now, to complete that, you'd actually need the alt and the width and the height as well. Okay. So I can, oh yeah, and then this last one here then is the end of the actual string. Okay. So in this case then we would have ended up with img src equals quote page dash photo dash 03 dot jpg slash brbr. In this case. But every time the program runs, we'll get a different random number generated, which will result in a different value going into my int, which will result in a different image tag, image file being specified in the image tag. And so it means then that when the page loads, you'll get some randomness. So in this case, we have pictures of New Orleans before the sea came and took lots of it away. And so here it's displayed. Oh yeah, I've also put in just other code just to say what number image it was. So this would have been page photo 04.jpg. So every time we load the page, math.random gives us a new number, a new real number between 0 and 1. We multiply that by 6, giving us a new real number between 0 and 6. We use the round method to round that to the nearest integer. And then we use that integer, we embed that in the image tag to point to a variety of JPEGs that have all been named conveniently to fit what we're looking for. So I'll put that code on the blog and you can go have a look at it. So every time the page loads, you see a different thing. Any questions? I have a question for you. You wouldn't perhaps notice it in the short time we've been looking at these, but it turns out that image 0 and image 6 occur about half as frequently as the other images. Anyone? I want you to have a think about that and see if you can think why that might be. So if you're to do this often enough, image 0 and image 6 would occur about half as many times as the other two. Whatever. It's to do with the random numbers, yeah? Close enough. So, let us imagine that the number has rounded to 2. Okay? Let's say we got 2. What was the lowest value of the real number that would have given us 2? Do you get what I'm asking? If we ended up with, if we did our rounding and we got 2, what range of values could give you 2? So like 1.5 to we'll say 49, or like 49999, whatever. We'll say so somewhere between 1.5 and 2.49 would have given you a 2. Okay? To get a 3, what's the, well, let's call this 2.5 here, okay? To get a 3, the lowest value that would have given you a 3 would have been like 2.5. And the highest would have been like 3.5-ish, right? Okay? You see how like from here to here would be 2, from here to here would be 3. Now to get a 1, down here we'd have had 0.5, okay? Fair enough. Now to get 0, what was the range of values? What's the highest value that would have given you a 0? 0.5. What's the lowest value that would have given you 0? Just 0. So the range of values for the real number that could give you a 0 is half the size of the range of values that could have given you a 1 or a 2 or a 3. So like if I was to throw this magical marker that was going to stick to the board like a dart, okay, somewhere in the range between 0 and 6, the chances of my landing in a range that could give you a 0 are half as good as landing in a range that will give you a 1 or a 2 or a 3. So there's nothing wrong with the random number generator. It's generating values between 0 and 6 in a perfectly random way. But the way we've rounded them has skewed the probabilities. Now, if you were playing online poker and that bottom range there was for the aces, you'd be getting screwed. So it's very important to think about what you're doing when you're writing your code. So what kind of solutions might we have? Well, it turns out that in JavaScript there's two other roundings you can do. You can always round down and you can always round up. So if you were to use the always rounding down, you'd never get 6, but you'd get a 0, 1, or 2, or 3, or 4, or a 5, and the probabilities of getting any one of those would be equal. If you always round it up, having multiplied by 6, you'd always get a 1, or a 2, or a 3, or 4, or 5, or a 6. So you have to be careful and watch for things like that. So sometimes, when things get a bit too computer science-y and you start to glaze over, just remember it can have real consequences, especially if you're in Las Vegas. Any questions? Okay. So we'll leave it there. So we'll look at some of this in the labs, and like I said, this isn't urgent. But I just wanted to start this now, and then we move on to other things in CSS. Thank you. Oh wait, what time is it? Is it past 12? No, I won't keep you for 6 minutes just to make that point.